Talking about the current Colorado Avalanche right now is not a lot of fun, so let's do some Avalanche trade tree history instead. The Avs were quick to the trade market after their inception. They certainly weren't afraid to make deals. However, their first handful of trades were admittedly fairly small. We already covered their first ever trade on episode 1. In this episode, we take on their next 3 trades. While none of these trade trees are particularly long, all of them would affect the Avs roster at least a little bit in one way or another. I want to start with trades number 3 and 4. We will get back to trade number 2, but that one is a little bit bigger than these 2 quick ones. On September 20th of 1995, a little bit less than a month out from the start of the season, the Avs acquired Jean-Francois from the Ottawa Senators for future considerations. On the future considerations side, the Avs and Senators would trade again about 5 months later, but there is nothing officially tying that back into this trade, so that is a tree that we will cover in a different video. On the Avs side, Labbé had spent the last 2 years in the Sens pro/semi-pro systems, and after being traded to the Avalanche would play the year out in the AHL under their farm team. He would stick around in the Avs system for another year, and while he would never officially play in a game for the Avalanche, he was a backup for at least one game. After the 97 season, the Avs did not attempt to re-sign him, and he would walk to free agency, where he would bounce around for a few AHL teams for a bit, before eventually getting a handful of NHL games with the New York Rangers and Columbus Blue Jackets. While Labbé certainly didn't impact the Avs very much, when you trade absolutely nothing for a player, generally you win the trade. Trade number 4 would go on to be more impactful for the Avalanche. Just a few days before the start of the season, they would call up the Toronto Maple Leafs and acquire Warren Reichel for straight cash. Yes, that used to be a thing. Before the existence of the salary cap, you could just give a team cash for one of their players. I couldn't find exactly the dollar amount that it ended up being Toronto taking for Reichel, but I'm sure it was a fairly decent sum. Reichel had carved out a decent career for himself as an enforcer in the NHL and never really played full seasons very often, but regularly got into games with a number of teams before the Avs, including the Blackhawks, Kings, and of course the Leafs. Reichel would only stay around for 1 year, playing 52 games and recording 8 points in the regular season, but he would be here and be part of the Avs' 1996 Cup win. After winning a Cup with the Avs, he would go to free agency, ending this trade tree. He would sign with Anaheim and play a couple of years there before interestingly being traded to the Colorado Avalanche again in 1998. But that's a different trade tree for a different day. From a hockey standpoint, giving up cash for a player that's part of your cup run, yeah, that's an easy win for the Avs. So that closes out trades 3 and 4 and brings us back to trade number 2. If you rewind back to July 12th, 1995, shortly after the NHL draft, the Avs traded Garth Snow to the Philadelphia Flyers for a 1996 third round and 6th round pick. Starting with the Flyers side of things, Garth Snow had been a third-string goalie for the Quebec Nordiques for the past few years, getting in a handful of games but mostly playing in the AHL. The Avs seem happy to come into the season with just 2 legitimate NHL goaltenders, and maybe we might be seeing the starting places of that one big move for that one guy, which we will definitely get to in the future. Snow would find his feet as an NHL goalie in Philly, being a backup to Ron Hextall for most of 3 seasons. He would put up a very solid record of 40 wins, 25 losses, and 16 ties or overtime losses. His .900 save percentage and 2.59 goals against average aren't great, but perfectly on caliber for a backup goalie at that time. Near the end of the 97-98 season, the Flyers were dealing with injuries. Hextall was in the twilight of his career and just couldn't play that many games anymore. So instead of keeping Garth Snow as a starter, the Flyers decided to look for a more experienced veteran goalie. that led them to trade with the Vancouver Canucks 1-for-1, goalie for goalie, Garth Snow for Sean Burke. At first, the trade looked promising for Philly, with Burke going 7-3 with a .913 save percentage in the last 10 games of the regular season, but they acquired Burke for a playoff push, and he would struggle there, winning one of just 5 games that he would play in the first round and posting a save percentage below .900 during that time. The other problem here is that Burke was a rental specifically for those playoffs, and he would end up walking to free agency in the offseason. Burke would go on to have quite a long career, playing for Florida, Arizona, Tampa, and LA after this stint in Philly, and in fact he would even get traded as a rental to Philly again in the future. His NHL totals are 324 wins, 341 losses, 110 ties or overtime losses, with a .902 save percentage and .296 goals against average. Not great numbers, but a lot of longevity there. His long time spent in the NHL did earn him jobs in the industry after he retired, and he is currently a scout for the Montreal Canadiens. For Vancouver's side, they didn't beat around the bush with Snow. They decided to give him the opportunity to be their starter in the following season. Unluckily for them, that did not work out great either. His record with the team would end up being 33 wins, 52 losses, and 11 ties or overtime losses, with a .901 save percentage and 2.9 goals against average. Just not good enough for a starter. In his second season with the team, Vancouver, unhappy with his performance, would go out and acquire Felix Potvin, and that would turn Snow into the backup and get pushed down the depth chart again. After that year, he would go to free agency, ending this branch of the tree. Snow would go on to play a number of years more with both the Penguins and Islanders as mostly a tandem or backup goalie. He never really achieved starter status in the NHL, and he would finish his career with 135 wins, 147 losses, and 44 ties or overtime losses, with a .901 save percentage and a 2.81 goals against average. Not the same longevity as Burke, but extremely similar career numbers when it comes to save percentage and goals against average, even win rate. And as most people probably now know, he would go on to be the New York Islanders general manager for quite a while before being fired just recently. Now on to the side of the tree that we care more about in the Colorado Avalanche. They got that 3rd and 6th round pick for Garth Snow. They would keep the 6th round pick and use it to take Kai Fisher 160th overall at the draft. Fisher would not pan out. He would go unsigned by the Avalanche and never even come over to North America, playing his entire career out in Germany. The initial trade in this tree was actually more of a 3-way deal, as after the Avs traded Garth Snow, they would immediately flip that 1996 3rd round pick to the Washington Capitals for John Slaney. The Caps would eventually use that 3rd round pick to take Sean McNeil 78th overall, and he would go the exact same way as Kai Fisher, never being signed and never making it to the NHL. Slaney, on the other hand, had been a very promising prospect for the Washington Capitals. Taken 9th overall in the 1990 NHL draft, he would go on to score the golden goal at the 1991 World Junior Tournament for Canada. By 1993, he was playing in the NHL with the Washington Capitals, but his time there would be marred by injury struggles. Those injury struggles would follow him to Colorado as well. He would play in just 7 games and record just 3 points for the Avalanche. 5 months after acquiring him, the Avs decided they no longer had a use for his services, and on December 28, 1995, he was traded to the LA Kings for a 1996 6th round pick. Obviously, this doesn't look great for the Avs. They basically took a 3rd round pick and turned it into a 6th round pick. But fate has a way of flipping the script at times. Slaney with the Kings would go on to actually perform fairly well for them, still battling injuries, but across the next 2 seasons would play in 63 games and record 31 points, when he was healthy, looking like the offensive defenseman everyone thought he could be. After the Kings, Slaney would go to free agency and bounce around, becoming a bit of a journeyman, playing for the Coyotes, Predators, Penguins, and Flyers, often splitting time between the big club and their AHL affiliates. He would eventually finish his NHL career with 91 points in 268 NHL games. fairly respectable numbers. On the Avs side, they would use that 6th round pick to go on and take Brian Wilsey, 146th overall. Wilsey would play the next 2 years in the OHL, finishing out his junior career before being signed by the Avs and joining their AHL affiliate Hershey Bears in the 1998-99 season. He would make his NHL debut the next year and would spend the next 4 years moving up and down, playing mostly with the Hershey Bears, but also getting games in with the Avalanche, totaling 69 games and 15 points in that time. You see, the thing is, around the turn of the century, the teams the Avs were icing were some of the best they have ever had. That made it hard for Wilsey to carve out a role for himself as more of a bottom six type player on the team. In 2003, he would be claimed as part of the NHL waiver draft. Yes, that was actually a thing before the 04 lockout. It was the last waiver draft ever that took Wilsey away from the Avalanche. Funnily enough, he would be claimed by the Washington Capitals, recouping some of their losses on that failed Sean McNeil pick, which the Avs had given them earlier. He would play for both the Capitals and Los Angeles Kings for the next handful of years, and on their weaker rosters would carve out a decent place for himself in the NHL, eventually returning back to the Colorado Avalanche in the late 2000s, once the Avalanche were a much weaker team, admittedly. He ended up racking up some very respectable journeyman statistics, putting up 109 points in 381 NHL games across his career. He would go on to continue working in the industry, and since 2015 has been a developmental consultant for the Colorado Avalanche. It's tough to pick an overall winner for this trade tree. Initially, I thought it would be Philly with Gar Snow. Their time together was quite successful, but by trading him to rent Sean Burke, they basically punted that. Snow's time in Vancouver was disappointing, so it's definitely not them. The Capitals actually have nothing to show for this trade tree, so they definitely get the loss on the tree. So that leaves the Avs with Brian Wilsey and the Kings with John Slaney. If you look at what's only attached to the trade tree for these players, Wilsey's time with the Avalanche was significantly less productive than Slaney's with the Kings. Wilsey putting up 15 points in 69 games to Slaney's 31 points in 63 games. On top of that, Slaney is a defenseman. The Kings only gave up a 6th round pick for Slaney's services, so ultimately, Slaney and the Kings are the winners of this trade tree. Despite all of the injury problems he had across his career, he still provided the most impact for his new team with the Kings. With that, the Avs had now completed the first 4 trade trees in their history. While none of them were very big, they did trade for a player that would be part of their first cup run, and they also acquired a player that would go on to be depth for them in the future. Having tested the market, the Avs were now ready for a big trade, and it would go on for quite a while. You'll have to check it out on the next episode of Avalanche Trade Tree History. Thank you for watching, and as always, a special thank you to all of my contributors on PayPal and Patreon. I really do appreciate it, and it makes videos like this one possible. If you want to join the ranks of the people you see on screen, consider throwing a few bucks my way at the links down in the description of this video. I'm Rudo3, and this next episode is going to take a while.